very difficult instruction, probably the hardest thing for me to do today, which is stand at the podium. I like to walk around. Actually, I had two administrative things that I forgot to mention earlier. One is when we get to the Q&A session, the only thing you can't ask us about is you cannot ask us about your career proposals. But anything else is fair game. And the other thing is, actually I'll let you do that, if I'm allowed to step away from the podium to do that. The other thing is that, to mention that Sam, Vijay, and I are all here the whole week. So, good. So if you don't get a chance to talk to us today, you can trap us in the halls this week. Okay, so there were a couple things that Sam talked, or a number of things Sam mentioned that I'll skip over that I was going to talk about. He did a great job. Look for we will frequently mention those three-letter acronyms: TWC, SBE, TTP, and EDU. Watch for those, because we do tend to talk about them. There's this chart. This was a chart of great deliberation when we were writing the solicitation. It went through many iterations. I hope it is useful. I'd, of course, like your feedback if you did or did not find it useful. But I do encourage you to look at it because it sort of gives the synopsis of what the combinations and permutations are that are allowed. It's all in the text as well, but there are different types of learners, so that's what this is about. And I will come back to that in a second. I'm going to talk mostly about the Trustworthy Computing Systems perspective and the transition to practice perspective. So Sam mentions some of these. For those of you who have been around for a while, this is roughly similar to the Trustworthy Computing program that NSF ran for a number of years. It's a pretty broad area. If it relates to the ACM CCS conference that's going on this week, it probably fits within the scope of the TWC perspective. So you think about anything that's security, technology related, and it's probably TWC. Theories, models, algorithms, et cetera, et cetera. And that includes trade-offs, et cetera. So I'm not going to cover all these. This is all in the solicitation. But I do want to, one of the questions I get a lot is, so does my area fit? And one of the ways to figure out is look at what we funded in the past. Now, what we funded in the past does not mean we can't fund something else in the future. But if your area is similar to something we've funded in the past, then you know, obviously, we are willing to fund it. And you should feel comfortable that we're willing to fund it again. But again, this is not, if you don't find something that matches, that doesn't mean we won't consider you. It just means that we haven't done it in the past. And in particular, since one of the areas that Sam mentioned was the moving target, we funded relatively little in the area of moving target. We'd like to fund more in the area of moving target. So if you don't find moving target, that doesn't mean that we aren't interested. It means that we haven't funded. It is a good way to get an idea. And the easiest way to find what we funded in SATC is you see down at the bottom here, there's a red circle where it says 8060 next to the word element code. 8060 is the magic code that means the Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace program. You put that in and you will get all grants that we've given under the Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace program. If you fill in 7795, again 7795, that's the Trustworthy Computing program, which is, as I said, it was the predecessor program. That's another way to find grants that we gave prior to FY12 and see whether we've done something that would be relevant to you. You can look at anything you want. We have abstracts for every NSF grant. They're all on the website. But this is a quick way to find out what we funded. I did a quick look yesterday as I was preparing my slides and sort of characterized the proposals. The grants, rather. This wasn't proposals. This is actual grants. We funded 83 proposals, totaling 56 projects. The difference is the collaboration. So 2 universities submit a proposal. Together that counts as 2 proposals, but 1 project. So this is sort of a brief summary of the areas we actually funded. This doesn't include careers, this doesn't include eagers, this doesn't include various other things, but this includes what we funded in terms of the general solicitation. So to give you an idea of the breadth. And the order is completely arbitrary. and I can't remember if this is numerical or based on the numerical order where I first found the topic mentioned or what. But anyway, don't treat the order as anything other than the number. Sam mentioned all the national strategy areas. Again, as Sam said, this is not an exclusive list. You don't have to propose to those. It's not magic words that are going to get your proposal granted, but we have fewer or less work than we'd like to see in moving target tailored trustworthy spaces in science and security. We'd like to see more, but that is not a magic word. Don't use it if you're not, if that's not where you're working. And we have a fair amount in design and security and cyber economics. So a couple of, or three common mistakes that people make in writing TWC proposals, or at least as I've observed them, are, as Sam mentioned again, the lack of a clear threat model. Coming up with a solution to some security problem, but not having any idea whether that security problem actually exists, doesn't help the reviewers understand why they should care about your research. Tell them why they should care about your research by saying, somebody bad could do this, or something bad could cause that. And by doing that, you motivate the problem. Another area we see is insufficient comparison to other research. We've seen a fair number of proposals where they were really good at summarizing the research from the 1990s and maybe the early 2000s, but don't cite anything more recent than the mid-2000s. That doesn't look very good if it's an area that has active research. It may be reasonable in some areas where there hasn't been much research, or there hasn't been research in a while because it wasn't previously considered practical, but now it is. But make sure you've done your background and you cite the relevant research, because you will get dinged on that otherwise. And there are some areas where the commercial world is ahead of the research world. If you're in an area like that, make sure you're citing what's going on in the commercial world and distinguish what you're doing. So transition to practice, I want to just distinguish transition options versus transition perspectives. Transition options are in that lovely chart that I showed you a few slides ago. Excuse me, transition perspectives, I said it wrong. Transition perspectives can be combined or individual. They can be with TWC and or SPE, and there's all sorts of combinations. If you do a transition option, it's different. You don't include your description of what you're going to do for transition in the base proposal. I'll come to that more in a second, but there is additional funding available. So you get a longer proposal and you can have more money, but then it means your proposal is fundamentally judged on the research, and the transition aspect is secondary, as opposed to the transition topic being primary. So with a transition perspective, the idea is to take some existing research, focus on transitioning into practice. It could be into the commercial world, it could be into state, local, federal governments. Again, if you look at what we've actually granted, you'll get some good ideas. Go to that NSF webpage, search for 8060, and then within 8060, search for TTP. You'll get some good ideas of what we funded and what makes sense. One of the requirements, if you're doing a TTP perspective, and I emphasize the word, this only applies if you're doing a perspective, is whatever you do has to be open source. These are the words from the solicitation, so I'm not going to go over them, but make sure you are addressing all these different aspects of what we're looking for in a TTP perspective proposal. A transition option, by comparison, is a supplement where you have a pre-approved supplement to your grant. When you submit it, it has to go with the TWC and or SPE proposal, and you have to, you're basically describing what you're going to do for transition in a short supplementary document, which is 5 pages. And it's very important that that not be in the base document, the base proposal, that your description of the transition be in the supplementary document. The transition option does not factor into the review panel. It's looked at by the program officers after a decision is made whether to fund your research. So again, these are the words. Notice there are some differences. Most of the differences are pretty minor, but the fundamental difference is that a TTP option doesn't need to have as big a spread across all of NSF the way a TTP perspective does. So which one should you use? Well, the real question is, are you taking existing research and transitioning it? If so, you should use a TTP perspective. If it's new research where you want to do a little bit of transition while you're in the neighborhood, then use a TTP option. You can't have both in the same proposal. The common mistakes people make on a TTP option are forgetting to include a separate document and including the description in the base proposal. You do that, it confuses us, it confuses the panel, and it's more likely to get the whole thing thrown out. Including the budget inside the proposal budget as if it were part of the proposal, that's another thing, confuses us, gets you thrown out. There were proposals that actually never got looked at because people screwed that up and included their budget where they weren't supposed to. The word option needs to be in the title. That word option in the title, and this is in the solicitation, that word option tells us, look carefully, NSF program managers, because there is a transition option. If you forget that, we may not notice it. We obviously try not to make that mistake, but it's a reminder to us. And finally, I want, before I turn over the mic to Peter, I want to put in this advertisement which actually neatly overlaps between what Peter's talking about, what I'm talking about. We're running this thing called the SATC Cyber Cafe, and the URL is at the bottom, www.satc-cybercafe.net. And this is a virtual workshop on November 2nd to try to encourage interactions between people from different part of the SATC community, especially SBE and TWC folks, to try to help you to come up with collaborations and write great proposals. And with that, I will turn it over to Peter.